Okay, folks. Well, we have a special guest here on the Deal by Nature podcast. We have the 2015 Ring of Honor top prospect, former Chaotic Wrestling heavyweight champion, and one of the hottest free agents on the market, Donovan Dijak. How are you doing today, Donovan?
I am doing extremely well. How are you?
I'm not doing too bad, thank you. Well, let's get in here. You're a New England native. You earned your master's degree in criminal justice while training to become a pro wrestler. Give us a brief rundown on how you ended up breaking into the pro wrestling business while working with Brian Fury at the Chaotic Training Center.
Well, basically, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. I started in 2012 at the New England Pro Wrestling Academy, formerly the Chaotic Training Center, but now it's the New England Pro Wrestling Academy under Brian Fury. And Warbeard Hansen was also one of the head trainers there at the time. Basically, I in 2012, I had just started my first full-time job post college, and once I kind of did some research on the business, I found out that there was a school, a very reputable school in my area, only about an hour drive away from where I was living at the time. So I realized that it was a realistic possibility in my life. So I kind of weighed the pros and cons of it. I determined that it was an avenue that I wanted to pursue, so I did.
And while you were working with Brian, what other names that maybe the people out there were also training under him at the time?
Training under him?
Yeah.
I mean, he trained more notable people before I was there. He's responsible for a majority of the training of Sasha Banks and Oni Lorcan. Since I've been there, it's been myself, Mikey Webb, my tag partner, my former tag partner, and a few other sporadic names. I'm sure I'm forgetting some along the way, but we always have guys coming and going from the school. That's specifically the people that Brian Fury as a head trainer. He's only been a head trainer for about 5 or 6 years now. So,
okay, going from there, then in 2014, you ended up with Ring of Honor at their Future of Honor 2 show. How did that come about from you going from, say, the Chaotic shows all the way up to Ring of Honor?
It was through their tryout system. They do a tryout seminar event every, I don't know, it's usually every 3 or 6 months, something like that. So I ended up going to a few of those. After the second one is when there was a sort of invested interest in me, and that's when I made my way onto the Future of Honor 2 show. And after that, I stayed in touch. I kept doing ring crew events for them and things like that until ultimately I ended up getting the call to be in the top prospect tournament in 2015.
Okay, so now getting into something a little bit more recent. In the last month or so, you have been wrapping up independent dates with some of the companies that you hold near and dear to you. So tell us about some of those appearances, especially those in the Northeast scene, especially with Chaotic Wrestling, things like that.
Yeah, it was really awesome experiences with all those companies. I got, much better receptions and send-offs than I ever would have expected from Chaotic Wrestling, Limitless Wrestling, Northeast Wrestling, Beyond Wrestling, Wrestle Circus in Texas. So I'm just thankful for the reception that I got. The fans have been super supportive and appreciative, and the owners of the company, the bookers, everybody involved in the production aspect of all those companies have been super supportive of me along my journey, so to speak. So I'm very grateful for those experiences. I'm thankful for the matches against top quality competitors, and it was a wonderful time, and I'm looking forward to sort of finishing it up at PWG next weekend.
And we'll talk about PWG in a minute here, but you also worked the Progress Wrestling show in New York. I believe it was on the 12th of August. There was a little bit of controversy regarding the venue of the show that night. I'm not sure if you were aware of that, but there was reports that it was extremely hot and also oversold as far as the gate goes. Can you speak on any of those statements from your perspective?
Well, I can tell you that it was hot. It was definitely very hot. It was a big building. So I would suspect that they probably haven't run into that issue too often. So there's no way we could have sort of expected that. But whatever was going on with the ventilation, I know it was a hot summer day, so obviously that didn't help at all. But yeah, it was pretty hot in the building. I mean, it wasn't like to a point of like I wouldn't consider it unsafe or anything like that. Like I've been in hotter situations outside. You know, it wasn't like it was 120 degrees or anything like that. But it was hotter than any show that I'd been on in recent memory. I couldn't put a number to it. I'd say it was probably around 100 degrees in there. But I mean, you know, sometimes it's 100 outside, so you kind of deal with it.
No, I totally agree with you. I'm just saying, just from some of the fans' reports that night, there was reports that like they ran out of water within the first hour, and that, you know, a few people fainted. And I'm just talking from the fans' perspective that there was, and it was also oversold. So I don't know if that was, maybe it's just something from a fan's perspective there that maybe some of the workers didn't realize.
Sure. I mean, I heard something about the water. I didn't see it myself, so I can't speak to that. I also heard someone fainted. I mean, I've been at lots of shows where there's issues with fans, so you know you can never quite be sure why something like that happened. If it was from the heat, that's, you know, unfortunate. I'm not sure. Like if I want to place blame necessarily on anyone or anything. Obviously this wasn't something that was foreseen as being a possibility, you know. I'm not sure whether the building has had issues like this before. I know certainly the promoters of Progress probably weren't super familiar with the building that are from this country, so I can't imagine that they expected. But I think the troubleshooting that night was in full effect. I think everyone was doing it as best they can. I mean, I had to wrestle a 15-minute match in a ring, and it was certainly hot, and I was sweating a ton. But you know, at the end of the day, we do our best, and you know, everybody came out of it sort of unscathed. For the most part, except for TK, of course, who kind of twisted his ankle the wrong way. But it was a great event. I don't know whether it was oversold or not. I know there was a ton of people there, and it made the atmosphere super exciting. So I mean, I view that as a positive. I can't speak to whether or not the capacity of the building was at issue or anything like that. But I know there was a ton of people there, and it was even though, you know, it had its sort of stops and starts throughout the night. I know it was a very memorable event for me. So I was excited to be there. I know a lot of the fans were excited to be there, and the promotion was excited to be there as well. So even though there were some complications and some reported complications, I viewed the night overall as a success.
And as far as the backstage atmosphere with the Progress guys and, you know, some of the other independent stars, say from the States, how was like the backstage atmosphere, you know, mingling with some of the guys from overseas?
It was awesome. I mean, I'm around a lot of those guys a lot. You know, I've been on a Progress show and some other UK shows recently. A lot of those guys are floating around here lately, so you know, we've become friendly. Some of those guys I've met for the first time. Some of them I've met a million times. You know, one of my good friends, you know, Keith Lee was in the back. I'm always around him and Riddle and I spent time in Germany with Walter, so I was familiar with pretty much everyone there. But I'd met a few guys for the first time, so that was exciting too. It's like any other pro wrestling show. There's a lot of guys I know, and some that I'm meeting for the first time. But everybody's ultimately super respectful, and it's nice to get to know everyone.
And I understand the night before, Pete Dunne he was busted open. And I guess he was supposed to work that night as well. From what I hear, I don't know if you would know that the WWE actually pulled him from that show. Do you know anything about that?
I know absolutely nothing about that, unfortunately. Sorry.
Just throwing it out there since you were there. Going back to just the indie scene in general, I do like to ask some guys here, obviously there's a lot of ups in the indie scene, but then there's also the downs, and without mentioning any names, do you have any kind of I'm not going to say horror stories, but any interesting stories just working along the scene for the last 4 or 5 years? I'm not going to ask for any names or for you to throw anybody under the bus, but sometimes it's interesting to hear, you know what I mean, like some of the situations that you guys have to go through that the fans may not even realize that you had to do this in order to entertain them that night.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some. I mean, a lot of the most negative stuff in pro wrestling doesn't really happen in the ring. Usually it happens trying to get to the ring, like traveling and stuff. It's your typical boring sort of like plane delayed stories and things like that. Nothing super exciting. I mean, every time I'm in the ring, I like to study and do my homework a lot of the time, if necessary, especially if I'm unfamiliar with the guy that I'm wrestling. Sometimes you're wrestling, the best wrestlers in the world. But sometimes you're brought into a promotion to try and elevate one of their guys, a local guy or whatever it happens to be. So when that happens, I'm familiar with the situation, and as a professional, I try to react and treat the situation accordingly. So even if I'm in there with a guy with not a ton of experience or whatever it happens to be, I'm prepared for that situation. So there's never really a situation where I feel like I'm in the ring and I'm, at risk of anything or that I'm with something that's going to generate some sort of horror story, because I ultimately at the end of the day, I know what situations I'm being put in, and I try to treat and react to them accordingly. So that way I can never, be, in a situation where something unexpected happens. Obviously there's going to be accidents and things like that, but I try to take as much precaution as possible to make sure that I can both get the most out of my opponent, no matter what level they're at, and that I can also put myself in a positive situation.
At the same time, we were talking about guys who may be a bit green, but there's also some vets out there who continue to run the scene who may be, I don't want to say past their prime, but their in-ring ability is not totally there. Have you been in a situation where maybe you've had to work with somebody who maybe just, couldn't do it as much as they used to?
No, that's hard to say. I mean, yeah, there's guys who are older who obviously are, past their athletic prime or whatever, but no one's ever been like unprofessional with me or anything like that. I mean, everyone's heard the stories of like the older guys like beating up the younger guys, or the green guys, or whatever it happens to be. I've been fortunate in that's never really happened to me. I would suspect that part of that happens to be that I'm a fairly big guy, so even as a green wrestler, an inexperienced wrestler, I was, never really the guy who sort of got taken to task by older wrestlers, because they knew that I could probably handle myself for real if need be. So, not that I would expect that I've wrestled anyone who would have done that regardless, but for me, it's never really come up. It's never really been an issue. And every guy knows their limitations. If you've been a professional wrestler long enough to be able to have digressed in the business, then you've been in the business long enough to know what your limitations are at that point. So I think most of those guys are pretty upfront about it, pretty straightforward about it, and we work accordingly.
Okay. Well, speaking of, the whole generation gap, as some people call it, I'm sure you're well aware of, social media and the whole Rip Rogers dive statements, and Randy Orton got involved and a number of indie wrestlers got involved. What's your take on the whole newer generation of stars versus older generation? Sometimes people can butt heads. A lot of people right now talking about guys like Joey Ryan, talking about, different situations, Young Bucks. And then there's, obviously the vets who, say things like, oh no, they're killing the business or things like that. What's your take on this whole situation, being somebody who can, work, older style, and you can work the younger style per se?
Yeah, I ultimately, I try to just present a style that I feel is the most entertaining for whatever audience I'm presenting it to. My general style tends to reflect a lot of old school sort of beliefs. The way I was trained was a very sort of fundamentally based platform, I suppose, or a foundation is the word I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of what I base everything off of. And when I'm when I'm adjusting to different crowds and different fan bases, that's when I sort of start to involve some of the newer stuff. I obviously insert a lot of elements of athleticism and high flying into a lot of the stuff that I do, but I still try to do my best to make everything matter as much as I can. I mean, I'm familiar with all those guys. I've done Rip Rogers seminars. He and I even had a discussion on Twitter about the whole situation. He's a big supporter. I think people tend to give him and a lot of those other guys a bad rep. And vice versa. I think a lot of the younger guys get a bad rep too.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
I think ultimately everybody's just in the business of putting on the best show and making the most money to sort of provide for themselves and their family and everything like that. I think we all understand that it's a balance between, doing that and sort of there's also definitely like an underlying feeling that you need to quote unquote protect the business, which is more or less sort of their way of saying you need to look out for people other than yourself. Mm-hmm. Because, obviously, even if you're making yourself a ton of money, if it's perceived to do bad business, then it might make someone else lose money, which would be unfortunate. So it's obviously a balance, and we try to take all of that into account as best we can. But at the end of the day, we're all just doing the best we can. So that's kind of ultimately where my stance lies with that.
Do you find that maybe some of this stuff online, the social media, that it's kind of worked themselves into angles as well? Like some of the stuff where you'd see, different wrestlers banter back and forth, that, that's starting to be like the new way to do an angle on Twitter?
Sort of. I think some guys definitely do that. I don't think it ever really works, to be honest. And I'm a big Twitter guy. I'm all over social media all the time, and I think it's a great platform and a great way to present whatever you want to present to fans, and maybe not necessarily character, but it's also it's sort of a balance between character and real life, where you're just sort of trying to attract the most attention and build your brand and however you want to do it. I think Twitter angles, honestly don't work. Even at higher levels, I'll see,
Baron Corbin, for instance. I don't know if you followed his latest things where he's been, blocking guys, talking stuff about guys.
See, I don't think that's an effort on his part to pursue any sort of angle or anything like that. I think that's him trying to portray his character online, which is great. I think that's helpful. I think that advances the company. But I don't like if I'm in an angle with someone in a promotion, I'm not gonna go to war with them on Twitter, because ultimately like 6 people are gonna see it. Even if it's more high profile than that, even if a ton of people see it, I don't think people watch the product on television or DVD or whatever and say, oh, they're fighting because they fought on Twitter. I don't think that's an effective tool. I think you get a lot more out of cutting it. Even if you are gonna use Twitter for something like that, I think if you cut a promo, even like a 30-second clip, and post that on Twitter, I think that gets you a lot more bang for your buck, as opposed to just kind of having a back and forth of words. Because to me, that doesn't. I'm sure it might move the needle a little bit, but probably not as much as people would hope.
Okay, well, now to get into some, questions. Some people are wondering some things. There's rumors. There's different things out there. I believe it was back in June. There's reports that you were spotted at Full Sail University. What was the atmosphere like at Full Sail, if you were there, and did you get a chance to meet any friends while you were there?
I've been to Full Sail in the past. And it's I think it was in 2000 and when was it? 2014 is when I visited Full Sail University for the full time. I came down to Florida to go to WXW, which is run by Pops off of the Wild Samoan.
Mm-hmm.
And I got some pictures taken with my buddy Harry Aaron, who's a wonderful wrestling photographer. He used to work for NXT for a very long time. So I got some pictures taken with him. He drove me over to Full Sail, and we kind of walked around and looked at the place. And it was a wonderful facility. It'd be great to work there in the future. But as of those reports, I can neither confirm nor deny
them. I can take that. So
that are in fact true or not.
So I'm not sure if you watched NXT TakeOver this past weekend.
I did.
We did see the debut of Adam Cole, and it seems that he has an alignment now with Bobby Fish and Kyle O'Reilly, where there's hints of a stable with former Ring of Honor stars. And now we have the recent signing of Lio Rush to the WWE. What's your take on these, recent signings and what's transpired, the landscape of how things are going with NXT with all these Ring of Honor guys now starting to show up?
I think it's great. I mean, all 4 of those guys are good friends of mine. They're wonderful guys and very deserving. It was great to see them on a platform like that and to get a reception like that. I'm sure Leo's gonna get a similar reception when his debut ultimately happens. It's a great time. I mean, those guys were awesome in the Ring of Honor locker room. It was a very welcoming sort of atmosphere, and it was a great place that I was able to call home for a very long time. And I think that they're going to succeed on the platform that they currently have, because they're the kind of guys who are going to succeed no matter where they go.
So Cole, Fish, O'Reilly, and Lio Rush are all at the Performance Center this week. Have you had a chance to talk with any of them this week?
I talk to a lot of people
yeah.
very, very often.
I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to get at. Have you spoke to them, say, in person at all this week?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Not to your knowledge, okay.
No.
And where are you currently based at the moment? I'm kind of curious. Without getting into exact locations, I don't want people out in the internet world to stalk you, but where's home base at the moment?
I live in Pepperell, Massachusetts.
Okay, so that's where you're based out of, and is there any chances of moving out of that location, or?
I suppose that would be my wife's decision ultimately.
Okay. And have you had that conversation at all?
We've discussed moving in the past. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I'm trying not to, obviously put you in situations where you feel uncomfortable with some of the questions. I'm just reiterating some of the questions that people have asked me, and I'm trying to do it in a way where you don't have to flat out say yes or no. At the beginning of the year, there was, you didn't re-sign with Ring of Honor, and there was talk that the WWE pulled a contract offer back in January following a legal threat from the Ring of Honor. Do you have anything, without going into specifics, or any comments on that whole ordeal?
I have zero knowledge of any of that, unfortunately. I've heard the same sort of rumblings that everybody else heard, and I honestly don't know whether any of that is true or not.
Okay. So you're wrapping up your independent bookings, and you have the final dates at the Battle of Los Angeles with PWG. I understand this is your first PWG show?
It is, yeah.
Okay, and that's September 1st to the 3rd. You're doing, on the 1st, you're doing a tag team match?
Yep, myself and Keith Lee versus the Chosen Bros, Matt Riddle and Jeff Cobb.
Okay, and then you're actually in the tournament and you're facing Trevor Lee in the first round.
Yep, that's night 2. Yeah, me versus Trevor Lee, first time matchup ever.
I'm not sure if you heard, Trevor Lee did recently make some statements on a GFW media call I was on, and he had some really, really interesting things to say about the 205 Live roster versus the X Division. He actually called the 205 Live roster garbage. I'm not sure if you heard any of those statements or if you watch both brands and if you see many differences as far as styles go.
I saw some retweets, I think, of his comments that were paraphrased, so I don't know whether they're accurate or not.
I was on the call. I heard him say it.
Yeah, all right. I don't even remember what they said.
He was most likely, in character at the moment, but it did turn a few heads thinking, hey, what are you saying, on the GFW media call.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I watch sporadic sort of both, sort of here and there. So I can't really make a comment as to the overall product because I don't watch either of them religiously. That being the 205 Live show and the X Division matches. Is that what it's still called? X Division?
Yeah, it's GFW. They still have the X Division. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I don't watch either sort of religiously, so I can't talk to the overall product, but I do know and have wrestled a lot of guys on both of those products, and I know that they're supremely talented wrestlers. So I can't speak to the writing of the show or the storyline or the production or anything like that, but I do know that the talent on both of those shows is extraordinary. So they should be very proud of their rosters regardless.
So as far as what you are watching these days, which programming are you keeping up with, if any?
Oh, if it's on TV, that's usually a good start because that means I can DVR it.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time, it's I watch Monday Night Raw, SmackDown on Tuesday, and then NXT on Wednesday, and then it's just a plethora of sort of YouTube matches.
Did you catch any of the G1 with New Japan or?
I did not. No,
okay.
that's. I have very few subscription services, so that would be kind of difficult for me to watch. For the most part, I only see stuff if it's on YouTube, or I do have the High Spots Network,
okay.
Because there's so many companies that I wrestle for that are on the High Spots Network. So it means that I can watch back a lot of my own matches to study. I watch, a lot of matches from guys that I'm going to be wrestling upcoming and things like that. So with all that, and between that and the WWE Network, my plate is totally full of wrestling. So that's sort of where I am right now. Which isn't to say I don't watch New Japan matches. I do occasionally, but it's usually if someone references me to one,
mm-hmm.
because I can't. keep up with all the storylines and things like that.
Understandable. And as far as, you know, like the Ring of Honor product, are you watching any of that like weekly on syndication or anything? Or
if a match piques my interest here or there, I mean, I'm so familiar with all those guys that for the most part there's not a ton of them that I haven't studied a ton in the past. So I'm usually looking for new stuff for inspiration or whatever it happens to be. But occasionally, if someone will send me a match, I'll watch it. Like sometimes my buddies get dark matches with Ring of Honor, and I'll watch those. I'm still good friends with Cody Rhodes, so I watched his title match from Lowell when he won the title. And you know, occasionally I'll throw on a pay-per-view if it's live and I have access to it. But I'm honestly not even sure if I get the channel that it's on anymore.
Yeah, it's on usually like a Fox affiliate at like, I get it here Saturday nights around like 9 o'clock. It depends on which Fox affiliate wants to play it that week.
Even when I was part of Ring of Honor, it was hard because, you know, we were all excited in New England when we found out that ROH was going to start airing on NESN, the New England Sports Network, which is a big channel in New England. It's where the Red Sox, play on.
Totally aware of that. Yeah.
Everyone was really excited for that, and then come to find out that it's sort of sporadic and when it plays, you know, sometimes it was Sundays at 8, sometimes it was like Wednesdays, sometimes it got bumped to like Sundays at 10, and sometimes it just didn't play at all, sometimes it got bumped completely,
or in the middle of the night sometime. I've noticed.
Yeah, so the way that was happening was kind of a turnoff. You know, people appreciate the ease of something, especially when it comes to pro wrestling, you know, because there's so much available so readily. That when something's just that you can just set your DVR and have it every week, that's nice. And sometimes these television stations make it so difficult that it becomes such a turnoff to the product. Because I'm like anybody else. You know, of course you can watch ROH for free on your computer every week if you want. But everyone likes watching things on TV. You know, I like the clarity of my TV. I don't have to worry about refreshing and reloading and stuff like that. So if I'm going to sit back and enjoy a weekly episodic television program, that's what I like to do. I like to watch it every week and get invested in the storylines and things like that, and be able to sit on my couch and watch it. And I like to do that on my TV. So
as far as the actual with the WWE programming, Raw, SmackDown, NXT, which one do you usually watch the most? Like, you make sure, okay, I got to catch up on this program this week.
I'd say the one that I watch the most is probably Raw. Okay. And that's simply due to the fact that I usually don't have something to do on Monday night. It's like often my night off. So I like to sit back and just be a fan and watch wrestling, because ultimately I think that's one of my favorite parts of being involved in pro wrestling, is just being a fan. And I think that gets lost on a lot of pro wrestlers, is they forget how to be a fan. But you can actually learn a lot from just being a fan and watching something as a fan. So that's what I like to do on my Monday nights. A lot of times on Tuesdays I'm training or lifting or traveling or whatever it happens to be that gets me out of the house on a Tuesday night. But yeah, usually Monday night is the I'm free and it's a lot of people don't like the length of the 3 hours, but I enjoy it because it's it's great. It's something to do for 3 hours.
Yeah. At the same time, though, some people with SmackDown, I really like SmackDown because of the length. And I love 205 Live, but I've noticed that, there's something about 205 Live that people just can't get behind. The matches are incredible. It's just, I don't know if people just don't want to see just wrestling. They want to see more of a story, which 205 is trying to do, but it's just not gravitating with fans as much. I did see a video from the Barclays from yesterday where literally you could see at least a third of the audience just started leaving once 205 started taping.
Yeah, again, I don't watch the show super religiously. It's for whatever reason, I think it's hard for people to get invested in shows that are on streaming services. This is from personal experience anyway. For me, I know it is. you know, I've made a point since I've been watching forever. I've been watching NXT weekly, and when I first started watching, it was on Hulu.
Yep.
So I had to watch that on my Roku player.
Yep.
This is all very old school sort of technology. So even though both of those things are still relevant today, but not to pro wrestling fans, I don't think anymore at this point. So yeah, I was watching weekly, and it's difficult. You know, it's difficult to not just physically difficult. It's just with so much going on in everybody's week, it's almost difficult to remember to do it. You know, it's like, oh, it's Wednesday or whatever, so there's a new NXT out, so I'm gonna turn on my Hulu. I'm gonna go over to I'm going to turn on my Roku. I'm going to go over to the Hulu channel. I'm going to find NXT. I'm going to play it. I'm going to watch an hour of this program. So you have to remember to do all that. Whereas if it's on television, you're just DVRing it or just watching it live, and there it is. It's a couple clicks on something that you're already on. So that's kind of how my brain works, and I know I'm a space cadet when it comes to remembering stuff. So I assume that other people are similar to me. So yeah, I think it's just difficult for people to, you know, to commit to watching something on their laptop or logging into the network on their streaming device and whatever it happens to be. I find that it's a lot easier for like a pay-per-view, you know, because you know that it's coming. It's sort of hyped all day. They're talking about it all week on television. So you remember, oh, it's Sunday night at 8. I'm going to throw on my laptop, or I'm going to set up my whatever device to play it on my TV, you know, and it's like once a month, so that's easy to remember. But like every week is, for me, it's like a commitment, and I do it with NXT, but it's kind of like even tonight, for example. Like I planned on watching NXT, but then it wasn't on TV, so I got caught up with something on my laptop, and I still haven't watched it yet. I'm going to watch it right after this interview, but like if something came up, then that would get delayed, and now tomorrow I might not remember, you know. So just, I don't know. Whereas like if it were on TV tonight, I probably could have like put it on in the background or something, and then been watching different parts while I was cooking dinner or whatever, you know. So that's just kind of how my mind works, and how I think a lot of other people sort of perceive stuff too. And obviously that's only a small portion of why people are watching or whatever. And there's people who study television metrics who know a lot more about this than I do, but that's just sort of my personal perception of stuff.
Just to let you know that the NXT tonight, they had Pete Dunne team up with Wolfgang and against Trent Seven and Tyler Bate, and it was honestly one of the best matches I've seen in NXT, and I don't know how long. So yeah. I would definitely, after this interview's done, tune in, even if it's just for that match, because it was amazing.
Yeah, I saw the card for tonight. All the matches looked great, and those guys are obviously, you know, they're friends of mine. You know, they're great guys, obviously talents. So I would expect nothing else from the four of them.
And speaking this past weekend, they had SummerSlam. Did you catch the whole show? Because it was a long show. I just wanted to maybe get your input onto, you know, from a fan's perspective, how you felt about that show being so long.
I did, yeah. I watched the whole show. You know, maybe it's just me. I don't mind the long shows. You know, everybody else sort of complains about them. WrestleMania to me was like excessively long. You know, I think that's just because I had something to do the next day, and it went into like 1 a.m. or whatever it happened.
Yeah,
to go
it was
into.
like 12:30 when it was wrapped up finally. I think.
Yeah, so to me that was like almost cumbersome. But again, it was WrestleMania, so I was like, whatever. I don't mind. I'll lose a little bit of sleep. Even SummerSlam, you know, they started a little early. It ended up going a little long. So you know, I don't mind that. You know, to me, you know, I like stuff like SummerSlam and WrestleMania. You know, that's some of my favorite days of the year. So,
of course.
So if it keeps going and keeps going, you know, that's just more entertainment for me, and I enjoy that. But I understand other people have stuff to do and things places to be in the morning, and you know, that makes sense. I mean, I know a lot of people consume a lot more professional wrestling streaming services than I do, or whatever happens to be. I watch don't get me wrong, I watch my fair share of professional wrestling. It's my job to watch professional wrestling, so I watch a ton of it. But I understand that people are trying to, keep multiple storylines all intact. They're committed to 5 or 6 different products. So when one of the products that they follow goes, 4 or 5 hours or however long it was, that maybe bugs them because they have so much other storyline and continuity to consume. So I understand, the different arguments, but for me on a personal level, I don't mind the lengthy sort of pay-per-views. To me, it's just more entertainment to consume.
Do you find that maybe there's kind of like an information overload these days? Because I know when I was growing up, it was, like the big 4 pay-per-views. You had your Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, Survivor Series, and then, sprinkle in some of the WCW stuff, and that was, it. And then now it's like the sky's the limit of what you can watch. Do you think people are maybe a little bit spoiled right now and they don't know how good they have it, that they can see all of this stuff at, a push of a button? Where back before, like I remember I had to, you'd have to go rent the cable box to get the pay-per-view or go to a CD bar to watch it. Do you think people are a little bit spoiled these days?
I mean, we've all been. It's all relative, yeah, if you compare today to 10 years ago, then we're spoiled compared to 10 years ago. If you compare 30 years ago to 50 years ago, then they were spoiled back then. If you compare 100 years ago to 500 years ago, then we're super spoiled at that point in time. So, that's just evolution of humanity, I suppose. We're always advancing. Everything's always trying to simplify and make things easier and make life a little bit easier and easier to consume stuff. But another part of evolution in life is that people are going to find things to complain about. So
that is very true.
So people are always going to complain about something, and things are always going to get easier. So I guess we can always count on both of those things.
So growing up, I assume you were a wrestling fan. Did you, watch all the pay-per-views and tune in weekly and things like that?
For a window, yeah, I'd say from like 1998 to 2002 or 2003 is when I was really watching all the pay-per-views and watching weekly on television. That's when I sort of got into high school sports and had to sort of commit my nights and weekends to football and basketball and track and field. And that lasted throughout college until I graduated from graduate school, which was in 2011. And then in 2011 is when I started watching wrestling again. So for since I was about 11 years old, if sports weren't sort of interfering in the way, then yeah, I was a pretty big pro wrestling fan.
And that was WWE and WCW, or more just WWE?
More WWE. I didn't watch WCW for whatever reason. I think we had access to
TBS was the
TBS and TNT. I think it was on. So I think we had those channels at the time. For whatever reason, I didn't even know it was a thing. That was kind of in the infancy of the internet, so you really would have had to research it. Like, I knew that it was on, I didn't know what channel it was on. Things were a little different back then. The TV Guide wasn't really a thing.
You'd have to flip open the TV Guide book.
Yeah, so to me, I just my brother was watching WWF, so I turned on WWF. That's what we watched. There wasn't much thought put into it.
Okay, so before we wrap it up in here, you do have your final, and so this is your final indie dates. Is your last independent date is with PWG, or do you have any other indie dates booked past that?
Those are it, just those three.
That is it, and then 1, 2, 3. As far as after that, or do you? I know we don't want to speak on specifics, just because sometimes you can't let any cats out of the bag or whatever. Would it be safe to say that you've decided your future after the PWG?
I wouldn't say that it's 100% set in stone, but my direction is pretty well considered, I'd say, at this point.
Okay, just because last time, I believe it was, I don't know what the last interview, maybe New Age Insiders, you were still on the fence of where you wanted to go. So has it, moved up into a certain direction a little bit more than maybe it was back then?
Been progressing sort of every day. You take everything with a grain of salt. Never sure what's going to work and what's not going to work until you're standing in the center of the ring, wherever I may end up. But
and do you have a date that maybe you may be having, where you figure, okay, well, maybe, once my PWG shows are done, I want to know what I'm doing by this certain date. Do you have that in mind?
I don't have an exact date, but I'd say pretty quickly thereafter PWG. I think.
Just because fans are wondering, there is.
No, I hear you.
Obviously you've probably heard all the rumors. There is TV tapings starting tomorrow. Is it safe to say you're not going to be at any TV tapings tomorrow?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Okay. And there's also other TV tapings September 13th, I believe. So you don't know that as well?
I have 100% zero confirmation of either of those things. So
as far as the rumors goes that, you are maybe calling a place in Florida your new home, is that something that we should totally write off, or should we just maybe wait a little bit longer before we get any confirmation whether those rumors are 100%?
Yeah, I think information will come sooner rather than later. We'll see ultimately where I think it'll sort of make itself kind of known ultimately.
Okay, so but ultimately shortly thereafter your PWG shows, you'll have a better idea of what's next for you.
Yeah, with every passing day, I sort of have a better idea of what's going on and solidifying sort of where I'm ultimately heading. But yeah, shortly thereafter PWG, I think everything should be set.
Just one final question: have you been offered any deals with anybody that you can talk about? Just to say
yes. I'm always being offered deals, to be completely honest.
And any major deals that would maybe be a little bit more than just a small scale deal with maybe a major company.
Yeah, multiple.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, that being said, Donovan, I hope to see you in the ring soon. Obviously, I can't be at the PWG show, but I will be actually attending an NXT show in September in Toronto. I'm not sure if you'd make your way that way or if I'm going to see you continue on the Indy scene. Next time maybe I'm in the Philadelphia area or Buffalo area. Maybe I might see you on a show there. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And I do thank you for your time today, Donovan.
Totally, man. Thank you. Four.